You're fired. You're fired. You're fired.
You're fired!
You're fired. It's hard to make that sound pleasant. It's hard to make it sound nice. It's hard to make it sound positive because inherently, you're fired is a negative message. The podcast for today is on communicating negative messages, whether in person or in writing or in email. There are a lot of negative messages that sometimes people in business need to communicate. Sometimes the message is you're fired or you're not doing a good job. Sometimes it's to a customer. We don't have what you want in stock, or your product is being recalled. Sometimes it's to your boss. Those are probably the worst of all, because then your boss can start with the "you're fired." But even when sending negative messages, there's a role for positive communication. Let's take a look at an example. This is from the TV show from my era, Cheers, which you may recall. And in this episode, Norm becomes the company hatchet man because his bosses discover that he's so good at giving people negative messages.
Yeah. Thanks for the beer, Mr. Peterson.
Sure.
I sure have had a good time today. Sure we won't get in any trouble?
Oh, no. Besides, it's great to get away from that old sweatshop anyway, isn't it?
Are you kidding? I love my job. The 5 months I've had it have been the best of my life.
Isn't that exaggerating just a little bit, Billy?
Not at all. Mr. Peterson, ever since I could remember, I dreamed of being an accountant. From the age of 6, I did odd jobs so I could put myself through college. Now that I have it, I feel like I've got the world at my feet. I just put a down payment on a house. Well, maybe it was a little more than we wanted to spend, but escrow closed today, so there's no turning back now. Besides, with my wife pregnant, we're going to need the room.
You're... Well, you know, my wife and I are trying to have a baby, actually.
Hey, that's great. Our kids are going to play together at the company picnic.
I don't think so, Billy.
Why not?
Because you're fired.
I'm fired?
Yeah, it's not your fault. Your history, Billy. It's a damn company. They're cutting back all over the place. You're a good accountant. I'm sorry.
I can't believe it.
It's not fair. You're so damn young.
That's right. I am young. I've got that going for me. I'll start over. I'll find something else.
So in this job market, good luck.
There, Mr. Peterson. Don't you worry about me. I'll be just fine. I'm gonna make you happy and proud again. Now, are you gonna be okay? Come on, show me a big smile. Come on, come on. Attaboy.
Okay, so maybe Norm is overdoing it a little bit, but you get the point. When you have a negative message that you have to deliver to somebody, and people in the business world have to do this all the time, to customers, to employers, employees, clients, colleagues, you have to tell them you can't do what they want you to do, or you can't give them what they want to have. So when you have a negative message to deliver in writing or in any other format, your primary purposes are to give the reader or the listener the bad news, and to do that unambiguously, to do that so that there's no question in their mind what you've said. Also, you want to have the reader understand the message and, to the extent possible, accept it, even if they don't agree with it and even if it affects them negatively. And you have to maintain the relationship to the extent possible. Because even when you give people negative messages, the chances are very good that you will still have a relationship with them, and that relationship has consequences for the future, and it's in your interest personally and professionally to retain as much of that relationship as you can, even when you're giving a negative message. But remember, you rarely do anything for one reason alone. And there are always secondary messages that you want to get across in your communication. First, to build a good image of yourself as a writer, as a professional, and how you deal with negative communications really is a very good indicator of how good you are as a person and how professional you are. You want to build a good image of the organization that you represent, and you want to eliminate confusion so that you can reduce and eliminate all future correspondence about the same subject. Now, if you're the sort of person who pays attention, you may remember that these are exactly the same secondary objectives that you have when you're sending a positive communication or a neutral or an informative communication. Because these are things you're always trying to do when you communicate. In any communication that you have about anything, you want to present yourself well. You want to present your organization well, and you want to eliminate having to treat the same topic over and over again in future communications. Some things to think about as you construct the message, and some things that you want to work on so that when you do have to send negative messages, you have in place a structure that can handle them. First of all, do you have a good relationship with the people that you're sending the communication to? This may be the most important thing I ever say in this class. Communication always happens within a relationship, and a strong relationship can withstand some negative communication, some negative messages, because you know the person, they know you trust them, and they trust you, and if you have to give them, say, a negative performance evaluation, because that is your responsibility in the company, your relationship with them will allow you to do that in a way that will be productive and will not cause reaction. Does your organization treat people well? Does the subject of the communication have a relationship with the organization that you represent? If your organization is known to be fair, if it's known to stand up and to believe what it believes and to act appropriately, people will accept the message, the negative message, much better than if your organization has a history of deception or of random or arbitrary kinds of negative communication. And third, are the readers expecting it? This is crucial. People need time to process, and if you've already prepared people for the possibility of certain negative communications, if they know that it's within the realm of what's possible, then they'll have had time to process it so that when they hear what you have to say, it won't come as a surprise, and you won't get the intense negative reaction that usually occurs when people are surprised by bad news. Two more things to consider. First of all, have people bought into the criteria that you use to arrive at your decision, even if they haven't bought into the decision itself. If they've bought into the process, and if you followed that process in your decision making, then there's a very good chance that people of goodwill will see the decision as fair, even if they don't see it as positive. And finally, after the negative communication, do you follow up in a way that is designed to build goodwill? Do you try to recoup what you can of the relationship, of the institutional relationship, of the personal communications that you have with the person, or do you ignore them because you don't want to talk to them, or do you get mad at them preemptively and write them off? If you do that, you're not going to have a very successful career in management. But if you can always do what you can to prepare people for your decisions, to follow processes that everybody can agree on, and to build those processes in advance so that everyone sees themselves treated as fairly, and to assure people that the decision is not a personal attack on them, then there's a very good chance you'll be able to deliver negative messages without creating negative feelings. Two other things that your book discusses that I want to talk about briefly are buffers and alternatives. A buffer is something that you put in between you and the negative situation. It's something that you put into the communication that helps people preserve their dignity, that helps them to understand that you don't mean things personally, and that tries to create good feeling even as you're delivering the negative communication. So some of the ways you can buffer negative communications are start with whatever is good about whatever it is you're talking about. If you're giving a negative performance evaluation, start by talking about what people do well, and then talk about what needs to be improved. Stick with facts. Don't use a lot of value judgments. you suck and you're horrible is not a good performance evaluation. You've been late 12 times this month is a fact. And people are much less defensive when they're presented with facts than when they're presented with value judgments. Make the letter very, very pro forma, very basic, and then refer to attachments, evaluations, sheets, things that other people have prepared, so that the initial letter is very businesslike and very formal, and the more evaluative kinds of communications that the letter is based on are later on in the letter after people have had time to process what the letter says. Thank people for what they've done. Very few people don't do some things well and don't do some things right. And if you're a boss who's always looking for what people do wrong, you're not going to have many friends and you're not going to be a boss for very long. So find what people do right, and even when you have to correct them or give them negative communications, include that positive. And finally, talk about general principles. As a general principle, we are responsible for providing high-quality care to our customers, and that's not something we can do if we're late. As a general rule, it is our responsibility to be fair to everybody. And if you start with the general principles and state those general principles, you will find that people are much more willing to connect the dots to their own behavior or to whatever it is that you need to deliver the negative, the criticism or the negative communication about. Finally, let's talk about alternatives. One of my favorite writers, Sun Tzu, the Chinese master who wrote the military classic, The Art of War, says, "Never surround your enemy so completely that there is no room for escape." And if this is true of your enemies, it should also be true of your friends and your colleagues and your co-workers. Don't take away all of people's alternatives. Don't back them up into a corner. Leave them a graceful way out, a way that they can still feel good about themselves, and a way that they can get what they want or they need. Try, even if you can't do what they want or give them what they want, try to think of ways that they might be able to get something else, or something that would be just as good. In doing this, you're helping them solve their problem, but you're also telling them that you care about them, and that in your institutional role, you may have made a decision that affects them negatively, but that doesn't mean that you don't wish them the best and want to help them where you can. This also allows the reader to get a little bit of distance between you and your decision, and a little bit of dignity. Always, always, always preserve people's dignities when you're making decisions. Nothing comes back to haunt you faster than cornering somebody and making them seem like they have no other alternative than to lash out. And finally, you try to end on a positive note. And when you give somebody an alternative, well, we weren't able to do this, but perhaps we might want to look at doing it this way. You can end the communication on a positive note, and more importantly, you can preserve the relationship.